Arthur Vance stood paralyzed on a freezing dirt road, the sheer, crushing weight of silence pressing down around him. Only moments before, the growl of the rented-for runner had vanished, taken with it every scrap of food, water, and navigation gear. His own son, Caleb, had driven away, abandoning him 30 miles deep in the unforgiving Yukon Territory wilderness. Arthur's shout, raw and desperate, still echoed faintly off the massive, snow-dusted peaks of Kluane National Park. Trying not to meet the grizzlies too quickly, Caleb had sneered, the word the final, icy sentence delivered without a flicker of filial feeling. Arthur forced air into his lungs, the frigid reality setting in. The boy he had raised, protected, and provided for had just sentenced him to death. But as the emotional devastation threatened to swallow him, a cold, familiar anger, the disciplined fury of a man who had survived hostile territories, kicked in. Shock was a luxury he couldn't afford. He ran a hand over his pockets. House keys, a wallet, and a small folding knife. Nothing else. Caleb had calculated the perfect, isolated end. He just hadn't calculated the man he was leaving behind. Arthur Vance, owner of a successful chain of auto repair shops, froze by his mahogany desk in his Portland, Oregon home, the pen still hovering over a stack of invoices. His flannel shirt suddenly felt far too warm, the smell of grease still faintly clinging to his fingertips from a transmission job earlier that day. The door had exploded inward moments ago, letting in the cool Portland drizzle, and now his son, Caleb, stormed across the hardwood floor. "Dad, I need $5,000 right now," Caleb demanded, the aggressive edge in his voice cutting like a physical slap. "I already transferred your monthly amount last week," Arthur replied, struggling to maintain his composure. "The $3,000 barely covers my rent," Caleb countered, his frustration audible. "You think that's enough? You think that covers everything?" Arthur had worked 18-hour days to build his business from nothing after Lara, his wife, had died. He had sacrificed everything to give Caleb opportunities he never had. "Son, we've talked about this. You need to find steady work," Arthur insisted. Caleb spun around, his face flushed. "Why should I work when you're sitting on all this money? When you control everything like some dictator?" The accusation stung Arthur. He straightened his posture, the military discipline kicking in. "I'm trying to teach you responsibility." "Responsibility?" Caleb laughed bitterly. "You want to know about responsibility? After you die, I'll be an amazing master of your auto shops. I'll run them better than you ever did." The words hung in the air like poison, and Arthur's chest tightened. The casual way Caleb spoke about his death, the calculations shining behind his eyes, revealed the truth. This wasn't mere frustration. This was pure greed. 20 years of single parenting, of hoping Caleb would become the man Lara would have been proud of, crumbled in that single moment. Caleb, perhaps realizing he had revealed too much, turned and slammed the door shut. The family photograph on the mantelpiece, Lara's smiling face holding 8-year-old Caleb at a baseball game, rattled violently. Arthur stood motionless, staring at the photo until the gentle trembling finally stopped. By Thursday, Arthur found himself pulling out old photo albums. Each page chronicled a forgotten sacrifice. $40,000 per year for Caleb's private schooling, his University of Washington tuition, and the expensive dorm life he insisted on, and the $18,000 Honda Civic Arthur bought him for graduation, because Caleb refused anything used. Tracing a photo from Caleb's 16th birthday, Arthur realized the progression. Every handout, every crisis solved with his checkbook, every rescued failure had chipped away at Caleb's character. "I thought I was being a good father. Instead, I created a stranger who calculated my death like a business transaction," Arthur realized. On Saturday, sitting in Lara's old chair, Arthur whispered to the empty room, "I failed her." Lara would have seen this coming. She understood people better than he did. He realized he had spent 2 decades trying to buy Caleb's love, trying to bandage his own guilt and inadequacy. Providing for him had not been the same as truly parenting him. By Sunday morning, Arthur sat at his desk, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for a legal pad. He reached for a pen, his breathing steadied by military discipline. He had to think clearly and plan for possibilities he had always refused to consider. The silence was shattered by the telephone's ring. Caleb's name glowed on the screen. Arthur hesitated, then answered, "Hello, son." "Dad." "Hey, how you doing?" Caleb's voice was unnaturally cheerful, too bright, too eager, like a poorly rehearsed pitch. "I'm fine. This is unexpected after our conversation last week," Arthur said. "Yeah, about that. Look, I've been thinking, and I was way out of line. I want to make it right. Actually, I have a proposal. Something that could fix everything between us." Caleb rushed the words, sounding too practiced. Arthur waited, letting the military training teach him the value of silence. "Let's go camping together. In the Yukon, Kluane National Park. Just you and me, like when I was a kid, remember?" The suggestion hit Arthur with whiplash. Caleb hadn't shown interest in the outdoors in high school. Caleb explained his buddies canceled, and he had prepaid tickets, flights, gear, and permits that would expire tomorrow. The urgency felt manufactured, clearly designed to prevent careful thought. "Come on, Dad. Remember when you taught me to read animal tracks? How to start a fire with wet wood? You always said the wilderness shows a man's true character," Caleb pleaded. The memory of those good times, before Lara's death had twisted their relationship, pulled at Arthur's chest. War raged between hope and instinct. Every rational part of his brain screamed warning. The timing, the sudden enthusiasm, the convenient story. Yet a deeper pain persisted. What if this was real? "The flights leave March 25th, Caleb pressed. "Portland to Whitehorse. Then we drive up to the park. 5 days in the wilderness, just like the old times." "All right," Arthur heard himself say slowly. "Let's do it." 3 days later, Arthur carefully folded the legal documents. Papers that felt heavier than they should have, weighting with unwanted possibilities, and slipped them into his travel bag's inner pocket. At the departure gate, Caleb waited, bouncing on his heels like an overeager teenager. His backpack looked brand new, tags still dangling from zippers. Arthur studied his son's face, noticing a slight twitch in his left eye, a sign of nervous energy, not genuine excitement. During the flight, Arthur shared stories from his military survival training. Reading weather, identifying edible plants, navigating without GPS. "You really know all this stuff?" Caleb asked, scribbling notes on a napkin. 20 years in the service teaches you to be prepared for anything. A calculating flicker across Caleb's expression, masked as admiration. The final flight carried them over mountain ranges resembling broken teeth against the horizon. Whitehorse hit them with crisp air and the smell of pine. Arthur handled the paperwork for Forerunner rental while Caleb loaded the gear, favoring his right shoulder as if something ached. Caleb insisted on a stop at an outdoor supply store, Northern Exposure Outfitters, demanding specific high-power flashlights, emergency flares, and an excessive amount of rope. The clerk, a weathered man with scars, raised an eyebrow. "Planning to get lost out there?" "Just want to be prepared," Caleb quickly replied. As they drove, Highway 3 stretched before them, a gray ribbon through endless forest. "Beautiful country," Arthur remarked, trying to break the silence. "Yeah, really isolated," Caleb responded with a strange, quiet satisfaction. Later, while stopping for gas, Arthur watched Caleb through the fluorescent windows of the convenience store. Caleb pulled out his phone, hunched his shoulders, and spoke in a low, urgent tone. "Everything all right?" Arthur asked when Caleb returned. "Saw you on the phone." "Just checking weather conditions for tomorrow," Caleb lied, avoiding eye contact. "Storm system moving in, but should clear by morning." Arthur knew the forecast was clear skies for 3 days. The familiar military unease settled in Arthur's gut. Something was wrong. The entrance to Kluane National Park appeared around a bend. At the visitor center, the desk clerk, a young woman with callous hands, registered them. "Which trails are you considering?" she asked. Caleb stepped forward quickly. "The Mantle River backcountry route. We want the full wilderness experience." The clerk's expression shifted to concern. "That's advanced terrain. Very remote. Most people start with shorter nature trails." "We're experienced campers," Caleb insisted, despite having done zero actual camping in a decade. Ranger Lena met them in her briefing room, which smelled of coffee and pine. She spread a detailed map across the table. "Gentlemen, let's be clear about what you're undertaking," she stated. "The Mantle River route takes you 30 miles from the nearest ranger station. No cell coverage. No other campers this time of year." She pointed to red markers indicating recent grizzly and wolf pack activity. "What about emergency evacuation?" Caleb asked, studying the isolated sections intently. "Weather permitting. Helicopter rescue could be days if conditions turn bad," Ranger Lena warned. She looked at Arthur with visible doubt after hearing Caleb's vague references to camping with friends. "Sir, with respect, this route isn't appropriate for beginners." Arthur signed liability waivers, rented a Remington 870 defensive rifle, Alaska Rule No. 1, never go unarmed in bear country, and ensured their emergency beacon was programmed with GPS coordinates. Ranger Lena stressed that even with coordinates, rescue in that specific backcountry could take 12 to 18 hours minimum. Loading the packs, Arthur felt pre-mission tension. The remote location, Caleb's obvious inexperience, his strange insistence on maximum isolation, every detail screamed warning. "Still sure about this route?" Arthur asked as they drove away. Caleb's smile looked forced. "Absolutely. No turning back now, right, Dad?" The finality in the phrase struck Arthur as wrong. The forest road narrowed until branches scraped the truck windows. Arthur's GPS showed their position moving deeper into unmarked territory. "We're officially off the grid now," Arthur murmured, watching his phone signal disappear. "Perfect. Just us and nature," Caleb replied, his laugh hollow. At mile 23, where the drivable road ended, they parked beside weathered wooden posts. Caleb struggled awkwardly with his bulging pack. Complaining about the weight, Arthur adjusted Caleb's weight distribution, noticing him wince when touched. "Old injury, nothing serious," Caleb claimed. "The trail wound through dense spruce forest." They saw massive moose tracks and heard the distant howling of wolves. Caleb stopped suddenly, his face pale, seemingly genuinely frightened by the realities of the place he had insisted upon. They stopped 3 hours later beside a rushing creek. Arthur, operating on military habit, quickly surveyed defensive positions and escape routes. He established their perimeter, hung the food cache 12 feet high, and situated the cooking area downwind. Caleb struggled with the basic tent assembly, holding up tangled guidelines like surrender flags. Later, sitting by the campfire, Arthur tried to connect with Caleb, sharing memories of Alara and their old camping trips. Caleb asked about Arthur's childhood, before the military, before the business. Arthur shared stories of growing up poor in rural Montana, earning every dollar through sweat. "Sounds hard," Caleb remarked, his tone calculated rather than sympathetic. "Hard work built character." "Taught me the value of earning what you have," Arthur responded. Caleb's expression flickered with resentment. "Lucky for me, right? Getting to skip all that character building." The conversation continued, Caleb prompting stories about Arthur's military service and survival training, the very skills that had kept him alive in hostile environments. "How do you know when someone's lying to you?" Caleb suddenly asked. "Body language, voice patterns, inconsistencies in their story," Arthur replied, poking the fire. As Arthur banked the fire for night, Caleb volunteered for the first watch. "Not really tired yet. I want to enjoy this." "Listen to the forest sounds," Caleb said. Arthur crawled into his tent, but Caleb's sudden interest in nature appreciation bothered him. As sleep approached, the casual movements outside ceased, replaced by a careful stillness. Dawn light filtered through the tent walls. Arthur awoke to the metallic clanking of equipment being loaded. Too early, too urgent. He unzipped the tent flap and stepped out into the frigid air. Caleb stood by the truck, methodically packing gear with a military efficiency he had never displayed. Every piece of survival equipment, the GPS device, the emergency beacon, the defensive rifle, the food containers, disappeared into the vehicle. "What's going on?" Arthur's voice cut the silence. Caleb startled and straightened, getting ready to leave. "Change of plans," he said, avoiding Arthur's eyes. "Weather's turning bad." The lie was immediate. The sky was clear. Arthur's instincts, dormant since arriving, screamed warnings. Caleb, talk to me. What's really happening here? Years of controlled resentment exploded across Caleb's features. You want to know what's happening? I'm done. Done with your control, your manipulation, your constant judgment. Don't call me son. Sons don't get treated like employees. Sons don't have to beg for every dollar while their father sits on millions. The venom was cultivated hatred. I've given you everything. You've given me nothing. Caleb shrieked. You made me dependent, kept me weak, controlled every aspect of my life with your checkbook. Well, guess what? I'm taking control now. Arthur's hands trembled as understanding crystallized. The camping trip, this whole thing was planned. Finally catching on military genius, Caleb's laugh held no warmth. Why? I don't want your allowance anymore. Dad, I want what's mine by right. Your business, your assets, everything you've been dangling over my head for decades. You're planning to leave me here? Yes. I'm leaving you here to figure things out for yourself. Maybe 30 miles of wilderness will teach you what real dependence feels like. Caleb, this is bear country. Without equipment, without GPS, Arthur pleaded. Should have thought about that before you made me into your puppet. Caleb slammed the tailgate shut. Maybe you'll survive, maybe you won't. Either way, I'll inherit what should have been mine years ago. Please, Arthur rasped. Whatever I did wrong, we can fix it. Don't do this. A flicker of doubt crossed Caleb's face, quickly hardening into something unrecognizable. Goodbye, Dad. Try not to meet the grizzlies too quickly. I want you to have time to think about what you created. The engine roared. Arthur stepped toward the truck, but Caleb reversed sharply and sped away. Through the windshield, Arthur saw his son's face, cold, calculated, and devoid of filial emotion. The sound of the engine faded, leaving Arthur standing on the empty dirt road in the vast Yukon wilderness, 30 miles from the nearest human being. The dust from Caleb's truck still hung in the air when Arthur's military training overrode the shock. Rule 1. Assess your resources. Pockets yielded only keys, a wallet, and a folding knife. No food, water, GPS, or emergency beacon. Rule 2. Evaluate the environment. March in the Yukon meant freezing nights. Dense spruce forests, unmarked trails, and complete isolation. Ranger Lena's warnings about recent grizzly activity in wolf packs echoed in his memory. Rule 3. Prioritize survival needs. Shelter, water, signaling, navigation. Movement was critical. Arthur began walking west, following the faint tire tracks Caleb had left, knowing that West eventually reached the main park road. He soon found an animal trail, which often led to water sources. At 58, his knees protested the uneven terrain, but fury fueled him. Fury at Caleb's betrayal and at his own blindness. The forest closed around him, creating a twilight atmosphere. He broke branches to create crude trail markers. Bear signs were everywhere. Claw marks on bark, massive paw prints, disturbingly fresh scat. Arthur made constant noise, remembering Ranger Lena's instructions on avoiding surprise encounters. Hours passed, his mouth parched from dehydration. He lost the trail several times, forced to backtrack. Exhaustion was creeping in, but stopping meant losing daylight. Then, a distant sound, mechanical, rhythmic, definitely human-made. Engines. Multiple engines. Hope surged through his chest. He changed direction, pushing through thick undergrowth. The sounds grew louder, definitely all-terrain vehicles, moving slowly and methodically, breaking through the tree-line. Arthur stumbled into a clearing. 4 ATV riders had stopped for a lunch break. They looked up in shock at the disheveled, scratched man who appeared from the forest. The lead rider, a bearded man in his 40s, immediately shut off his engine. "Sir, what happened? Why are you out here alone?" Arthur's voice was hoarse. "My son, he left me here, took all our equipment and drove away." The man's expression shifted to disbelief. "That's attempted murder. I'm Elias Thorne, former park warden here. These are my friends. We're doing a backcountry tour." A woman in the group handed Arthur a water bottle, which he drained gratefully. "How long ago did this happen?" Elias asked, his tone professional and urgent. "This morning. Maybe 4 hours ago." Elias studied his GPS device. We need to get you out immediately. If your son took the main road out, he's looking at a 6-hour drive minimum to reach Whitehorse. But I know a shortcut. An old ranger trail that cuts through the backcountry. We can have you back to the park entrance in 90 minutes, Elias explained. The implication hit Arthur like electricity. You mean I could get back before him? Easily, Elias confirmed. The question is, do you want to involve law enforcement immediately, or do you have other plans? A hard resolve solidified in Arthur's chest, replacing fear. Caleb had calculated his death and counted on his helplessness. He had underestimated the wilderness community. I want to get back to the motel first, Arthur said carefully, before I decide anything about police. Elias nodded, understanding passing between them. Climb on behind me. We'll take the ranger trail. Your son will never see us coming. Elias navigated the ATV through hidden forest paths, a network of service trails known only to rangers and guides. They made excellent time, emerging onto the paved road well ahead of schedule. The Cluane peaks and appeared in the distance. Arthur scanned the parking area. The rental truck was not yet there. Looks like your son's still driving back, Elias observed. You've got time to prepare whatever reception you're planning. The other riders offered contact information as witnesses. Elias gave Arthur his personal card. Call me when you're ready to talk to authorities. What your son did needs to have consequences. As they prepared to leave, Elias paused. Sir, you mind me asking what you're planning to do when he gets back? Arthur looked toward their room, where the legal document still waited in his jacket pocket. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants, Arthur said quietly, just not the way he expects to get it. Back in the room, Arthur pulled out his phone. 3 weeks ago, he had changed his will out of paternal disappointment, a decision that now felt like divine preparation for war. The paper stated clearly that Caleb would inherit nothing. Everything would go to wildlife conservation charities, veterans organizations, and a scholarship fund in Alara's name. Arthur dialed Elias's number. Elias, I need your help with something specific. When Caleb returns, I want everything documented. His reaction, his words, everything. You want me there as a witness? And bring that digital camera you had on the trail? Caleb's going to say things that should be preserved for a jury. Elias agreed to arrive by 8:30 p.m. Arthur then called his attorney in Portland. The new will be filed officially tomorrow morning. Caleb's inheritance was about to evaporate. Arthur arranged an adjacent room for Elias at the inn. He showered off the wilderness grime, changed clothes, and methodically arranged the room. The legal documents were spread across the desk, where Caleb would see them immediately. Elias's camera would have clear sight lines. Arthur's phone was programmed with 911 on speed dial. Arthur recognized the irony. Caleb had spent months planning his father's death in the wilderness. Now Arthur was planning his son's social and financial death in civilization. At 8:15 p.m., Elias knocked softly. He entered carrying professional recording equipment. Recording equipment set up in the adjacent room. Audio and video coverage of this entire space, Elias confirmed. With your testimony, my witness statement, and whatever he says tonight, he's looking at serious prison time for attempted murder in the first degree. Darkness gathered outside the motel. At 8:47 p.m., headlights swept across the parking lot. Arthur recognized the distinctive sound of the rental truck engine. Caleb had returned from his failed murder attempt. Arthur positioned himself in the chair, facing the door, the documents clearly visible on the desk. Caleb's key scraped the lock. When the door opened, he stepped inside with the cautious air of someone expecting an empty room. The overhead light illuminated his face, and recognition hit him like a physical blow. Dad. The word was strangled, disbelieving. Hello, son. How was your drive? Arthur asked, his voice conversational. Caleb's legs seemed to buckle. He gripped the door frame, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. How are you here? How did you get back? I left you 30 miles. 30 miles from nowhere, without food, water, or equipment. Yes, I remember. Arthur finished for him. Turns out I'm harder to kill than you calculated. Dad, wait. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. You brought me to the Yukon to murder me for my inheritance. Interesting choice of last words. By the way, Go meet the Grizzlies. Truly captured the sentiment beautifully. Caleb stood wordless, sweat beading on his forehead. The problem with your plan, Arthur continued, standing slowly, is that you underestimated the wilderness community. Turns out there are people who actually help each other survive instead of abandoning family members to die. Look, if this is about money, it was always about money for you. That's what I finally understand. Every conversation, every camping trip, every moment of what I thought was father-son bonding. You were just calculating my net worth. Arthur walked to the desk and picked up the legal documents. You want to know what's fascinating? 3 weeks ago, right after our fight, I changed my will, called it paternal disappointment at the time. Caleb's eyes locked onto the papers. What do you mean, changed? I mean you inherit nothing. Not the auto shops, not the bank accounts, not the house your mother loved. Everything goes to charity. Wildlife conservation, veterans organizations, scholarship funds. The color drained completely from Caleb's face. You can't do that. I'm your son. You were my son this morning. You became something else entirely, a man who calculated his father's death for financial gain. Caleb's composure shattered. You self-righteous bastard. You created this. Your constant control, your manipulation, keeping me dependent while judging every choice I made. This is your creation. You're absolutely right. I did create this, Arthur admitted calmly. I enabled your dependence, bought your affection, confused providing with parenting. That's my failure as a father. Then change the will back. Fix this, Caleb pleaded. The will was filed this afternoon. It's done, Arthur said. He walked toward the door. But you're wrong about one thing. I didn't create your willingness to commit murder. That choice was entirely yours. Where are you going? To call the police? Attempted murder is still a felony, even when it fails. Dad, wait. Arthur paused at the threshold. Goodbye, Caleb. In a strange way, you've given me exactly what I needed. Absolute clarity about who you really are. The last thing Arthur saw before stepping outside was Caleb collapsing into the chair, staring at the legal documents that represented the complete destruction of everything he had tried to gain through his father's death. The fluorescent lights in the White Horse RCMP station interview room buzzed. Detective Eva Morales reviewed the evidence spread across the metal table. Elias Thorne's digital recordings, Arthur's sworn statement, and Caleb's own recorded confession from the Cluane Peaks Inn. Mr. Vance, I've been investigating wilderness crimes for 8 years. This is the most premeditated case of attempted murder I've encountered, Detective Morales said. She noted that Caleb's statements were remarkably incriminating. The district attorney will file charges this morning. Attempted murder in the first degree, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit fraud regarding your inheritance. Alaska, and by extension the Yukon equivalent, does not treat deliberate wilderness abandonment lightly. Through the interview room window, Arthur could see Caleb being processed at the booking desk. Overnight in jail had stripped away his pretense. He was just a man facing the consequences of calculated evil. Elias sat beside Arthur, having driven down to provide his witness testimony. What's the likely sentence? Arthur asked. 15 to 25 years, depending on plea negotiations. Deliberate wilderness abandonment is viewed as equivalent to attempted murder, because that's exactly what it is, Detective Morales confirmed. Arthur watched his son through the glass, feeling an unexpected absence of satisfaction. This was not victory, merely the natural endpoint of years of choices driven by entitlement. I'm establishing a foundation in my late wife's name, Arthur told the detective. It seems appropriate that Caleb's inheritance should help people who actually deserve assistance. Arthur and Elias walked out into the crisp White Horse morning air. What happens now? Elias asked. Back to my business in Portland. Back to figuring out what kind of man I want to be in whatever years I have left, Arthur replied. He looked up at the mountains rising beyond the city skyline. Turns out surviving your own child's murder attempt gives you remarkable clarity about priorities. Arthur considered the question of visiting Caleb during the trial, the paternal instinct warring against the reality of betrayal. No, the man I raised died somewhere in those woods yesterday morning. What's left isn't my son anymore. Elias handed Arthur a card. If you ever want to come back to the Yukon for the right reasons, camping, fishing, actually enjoying the wilderness, call me. Trips are on the house. Why would you do that? Arthur asked. Because you survived something that should have killed you, and instead of letting it make you bitter, you're using it to help other people. That's worth supporting. Thank the wilderness community. We look out for each other up here, Elias said. Arthur later contacted his attorney. There were foundations to establish, scholarships to fund, and a lifetime of enabling to undo through positive action. Caleb had brought him to the Yukon to die for money. Instead, Arthur had learned to live for purpose. In trying to destroy him, Caleb had accidentally taught Arthur the difference between merely providing for someone and actually caring about them. 3 days later, back in Portland, Arthur received a 5-page letter from Caleb in jail, full of manipulation disguised as an apology, promising change if Arthur would just reconsider the inheritance. Arthur read it once, then fed it through his office shredder. Some relationships, he realized, don't survive attempted murder, no matter how much money has been invested in them.